Hi, do you need to make a legal demand of someone? Give me 5 minutes and I'm going to show you how to do it right. Hi, this is Attorney Jeremy Hogan and welcome to Legal Briefs. So today we're going to be talking about a demand letter, and a demand letter is simply a formal demand that someone or something stop doing something. So in theory, a demand letter is very easy to do. Actually, you could just scribble something on a napkin, hand it to the person, and that's a demand letter. But a well-done demand letter requires thought and professionalism. Okay, first let's talk about the technical issues. Often a written demand is a condition precedent to legal action, and you may need to prove sometimes years later when the letter was sent and to whom. So at the top of the letter, you're always going to start off with the date and then how the letter was sent, by US mail, email, hand delivery, facsimile, whatever it might be. If you send a letter by mail, there is a rebuttable presumption that the recipient received it. This was decided by the US Supreme Court a long time ago. But why rely on a rebuttable presumption if you don't have to? Instead, you should always send your letters either by mail with proof of receipt, or even easier, what I like to do nowadays, by email or facsimile. That way, if the recipient denies receiving the letter, you have some proof that you sent it. Next, always think that your letter will someday be put on a big overhead projector and that everyone in a courtroom will be looking at it, then looking at you, then looking at it. So make sure you stay professional and factual. Don't say anything that's going to embarrass you later, years later down the road. Now, as to the substance, the format of a demand letter is always the same. First, you make your demand right away. Tell them what you want right in the first paragraph. Then you tell the recipient the legal basis of your demand, and then at the end you reiterate your demand with a time limitation for the recipient's action. Now that's the basics. So the basics are easy. The most important thing is to think about your evil enemy that you're writing to and get into his or her head. Your goal is to get the recipient to do something, and sometimes you want to threaten them, sometimes you want to cajole them, sometimes you want to even empathize with them. So your letter needs to be tailored to who your recipient is. So it's really the tailoring of your letter to who the recipient is where the art and the magic are, okay? So I'm going to give you 2 examples so you can see exactly how different these things can be. The first is a cease and desist letter that I wrote for bankruptcy clients who are still being contacted by collections prior to filing. Now this letter is a notice type of letter and a condition precedent also. It's also being written to a debt collector, which is a business. So the point here is to be very clear and concise. No need to say too much. We say point blank, the purpose of the letter, right in the first sentence, stop all contact with me. In the second paragraph, we tell them how they contacted us. And in the third paragraph is the legal basis of the demand. And the last paragraph is the demand and the consequence of failure to cease contact. So this is not a nice letter, and it doesn't have to be. It's being sent to a collection agency. Now, if you are writing a letter to your neighbor to cease trespassing on your property, for example, you'd want the tone to be somewhat different, more informal and more reasonable, a much softer tone. Now, going back to our cease and desist letter briefly, it's a good example because it gives you the elements of a good demand letter. Start with what you want, stop contacting me. Next, state the basis for what you want, federal law. And last, again, make your demand and specify the time limitation for doing so. Stop calling immediately, stop calling right away. So now let's look at a personal injury demand, and you can see exactly how different it is while maintaining the same framework. Our cease and desist letter was 1 page. This is a letter to a Geico adjuster demanding on a personal injury case, and it's 12 pages long. This is a letter to the Geico adjuster. The adjuster is just doing a job, hasn't done anything wrong. The purpose of the tone in a personal injury demand letter is to convey that we know our case in detail and know what it's worth while being cordial. Being a jerk to an adjuster is almost never a good thing. Don't do it. This demand letter is almost 12 pages long, and I'll explain why. Insurance adjusters nowadays are tied to computer programs as far as settling cases. They input treatment codes and diagnosis codes, and the computer then does whatever a computer does and gives them a settlement range. So my job in our letter is not just to demand money, but to help the adjuster get the computer to give us the money. So you are going to see that throughout the letter, we break out all the codes that the adjuster will have to input. We basically do their job for them to make it easier for Geico to pay us a lot of money. And when we started helping the adjusters like this about 2 or 3 years ago, our average settlement value went up 10 to 20%. So what I'm trying to show you is that it's not always about harsh demand language, but really about knowing your audience. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to help the adjuster help us. And it has worked like magic. But the basics are always going to be the same. So take a look at this letter. We start on the first page saying what we want. We want you, Geico, to pay your policy limits to us. On page 2, we talk about liability, which is the legal basis for recovery, and we list and add up all the bills. On page 3, we tell Geico our client's future medical needs. followed by all the ICD and CPT codes for all treatment. Then we give a synopsis of injuries on page 4, and then on pages 5 through 9, we break out each injury by each body part. Why? Because that is how the adjuster software does it. So we have 100% tailored our demand letter to how the Geico computer system looks at a case. Finally, we include duties under duress on page 10 because we know that Geico has an extra screen for that and it gets us extra money. And then we conclude with our demand for tender of the policy limits, which must occur within 30 days, which is our time frame. So between this demand letter and the non-contact letter, you can see the difference that knowing your recipient makes. These are two very different letters, but they're both demand letters. Okay, and there you have it. That's the basics of writing a good demand letter. And finally, I want to leave you with something maybe a little more fun. I'm going to leave you with a demand letter that Budweiser, the demand page, sent to a small brewery who made a beer which they called the Dilly Dilly, and Bud at the time was using Dilly Dilly in their commercials, so they really wanted the brewery to stop using the word Dilly Dilly, but they kept in mind who the recipient of their message was and how this would look if it was on a big screen in front of a jury, and they sent their page to make the demand, and he forgot to put in his time demand, but otherwise I thought it was spot on, so enjoy.
Hear ye! Hear ye! Dear friend of the crown, Modest Brewing Company, congratulations on the launch of your new brew, Dilly Dilly Mosaic Double IPA. Let it be known that we believe that any beer that is shared between friends is a fine beer indeed, and we are duly flattered by your loyal tribute. However, Dilly Dilly is the motto of our realm, so we humbly ask that you keep this to a limited edition, one time only run. This is by order of the king. Disobedience shall be met with additional scrolls. Then a formal warning, and finally, a private tour of the pit of misery. Please send a raven, letter, or electronic mail to let us know that you agree to this request. Also, we will be in your fair citadel of Minneapolis for the Super Bowl, and would love to offer 2 thrones to said game for 2 of your finest employees to watch the festivities and enjoy a few Bud Lights on us.
Yeah!
Yours truthfully, Bud Lights.
Yeah!